Well, quite recently, the federal government and the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation Limited (NNPC) have actually made a statement saying that there are no plans to revoke the Naira for crude deal with local oil refineries. Well, you would recall that in October 2024, this deal came to bear to enable local refineries purchase crude in our local Naira currency. Well, this deal came to a halt in March 31st, by March 31st, because it has already elapsed its first phase of implementation. Well, the federal government has debunked the fact that it is not a complete halt, rather, it is for it to be reviewed and re implemented. However, there are questions around the effective implementation of this policy, among other concerns. Well, joining us to talk more on this development is a global economic analyst, Nick Agule. Good morning, Mr. Nick. Can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Good morning to all our viewers globally.
Nick Agule, good morning. Thank you for joining us this morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I can hear you clearly. Can you hear
So,
me?
Nick, we understand that the first phase of this deal has actually elapsed. It did so on the 31st of March. Now, would you say that the objectives of the Naira for crude deal were actually achieved? What are your thoughts given the, during the implementation of the first phase from October through to March 31st this year?
It's an issue. If you cannot hear me, then it means whatever I'm saying may not come across to the audience. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Okay, fine. All right. Okay, thank you. Okay, so there are two aspects to this deal in terms of outcomes. The question is, this deal in its first phase, did it impact on the prices of petroleum products in terms of lowering them? Secondly, did this deal impact on the exchange rate in terms of making the Naira to be stronger? And my own assessment is that this deal did not impact as much on the cost of petroleum products because the deal itself is not that the NNPCL will sell crude oil to Dangote refinery at a lower cost. No, that was not the deal. The deal was that NNPCL will sell crude oil to Dangote refinery at the market rate, at what is going on in the market. However, the currency of settlement is what was different in this deal. So NNPCL sells crude oil to Dangote refinery in dollars. But instead of Dangote refinery paying dollars, Dangote refinery pays Naira. So in terms of cost of purchase, Dangote refinery was facing the same cost of purchase, whether he paid in Naira or he paid in dollars. So you can see that it was not meant to significantly impact on the prices of Dangote refinery's output in terms of lowering the prices. What this did was significantly expected to impact upon was the exchange rate. Because if this deal was not in place, it meant that Dangote refinery will use dollars, will buy crude oil, will refine it and sell it in Naira. Then Dangote refinery will need to convert that Naira to dollars so that they will go and buy crude oil again. So the pressure would have been on the Naira chasing dollars, and that will make Naira to be weaker. But strangely, even during the time the deal was in operation, despite the fact that hundreds of millions of dollars that would have been bought by Dangote refinery were not being bought because he was paying for crude oil in Naira. The impact on the exchange rate was minimal. We didn't see the exchange rate move from the 1,500 levels it is now to anything 1,400. This exchange rate has not touched 1,400 for a long time. So if you really ask me the impact of this deal, I will say that what Nigeria should be looking at is the crude oil prices themselves. By the time Dangote refinery started operations, crude oil touched $90. But as we speak today, crude oil is anything $63, $64. So if the price of crude oil has crashed from $90 to 60 something dollars, we expect that Dangote refinery will transfer these savings in terms of the cost of crude oil into lowering significantly the prices of petroleum products in the market. Why aren't we seeing prices at the 600, 700 range, given the crash in the price of crude oil? And we're just seeing marginal reductions to 800 and something, which by the time it gets to the pump is already 900 and something. And some people are buying 1,000 and something. So I'm very doubtful if Dangote is giving us the best deal. But you know what? Dangote refinery may not give us the best deal because there's nobody competing with him. If you are almost a monopoly, so dominant in the market, without anybody competing with you, and you are the one determining the prices, as businessmen, they are most likely not expected to give us any fair pricing. And that is the area where the government needs to step in and ensure that Nigerians are enjoying the benefit of the low oil prices that we now have in the international market.
I hear you're talking about the marginal, decrease in prices, but in their defense, there's this, news making the rounds that the agreement was to provide at least 450,000 barrels of crude, but it seems as though they are falling short. And Dangote, for example, refinery would still have to go and purchase crude with dollars, and that could be the reason why we are seeing only marginal decrease in price. And what do you think about that?
Well, so I can give an example. For instance, let's say that I cook rice and sell it to consumers, and a bag of rice costs, let's say, $50. Just by way of example, or let's just make it simpler. Let's say a bag of rice costs $10. Now, if I go and buy a bag of rice at $10, the cost of buying that rice is $10. Or if the person who is selling the rice to me says that you can pay for this rice in Naira, and Naira is 1,500 Naira to a dollar, then I know that that rice is 15,000 Naira in Naira. So whether I pay 15,000 Naira or I pay $10, I'm paying the same cost. And I'm cooking that rice. There's no way I will say, oh, because I pay 15,000 Naira, I will now sell a plate of rice for 200 Naira. But because I paid in dollars, I will sell a plate of rice for 300 Naira. It's the same cost. I'm facing the same cost. The only difference is that I am paying in Naira instead of paying in dollars. Now, the question is that I am not expected, if I am paying for the same thing in Naira, to cut down the price of my output. For instance, if it costs me $10 to make to buy a bag of rice, and I sell it for 200 naira. Just because I went and bought a bag of rice at 15,000, which is actually the equivalent of $10, I will now say, oh, I will say the rice at 150. It doesn't make sense. What Dangote refinery, what the authorities, the regulators should be asking Dangote refinery is that crude oil rose to up to $90 during the time that you have been in operation. And today, crude oil is $63, $64. Why are you not cutting down the prices of your petroleum products in line with the crash in crude oil cost? I have not heard that question answered. And for me, that is why we shouldn't put all our eggs in one basket. We cannot depend on Dangote refinery alone. Nigeria has to do something about our 4 refineries that are lying fallow there. 4 refineries with a combined capacity of 445,000 barrels of refining per day. If those 4 refineries were back in operation and we were feeding it with crude oil, refining the crude oil, I am very confident that giving crude oil cost at 60 something dollars, we could even be buying petrol at 500 naira. And we're not buying petrol at 500 naira. We're buying petrol at almost double that 500 naira. There is a lot that is happening here that we cannot see. But in any case, let us see how now that the government says the deal is back on the table and Dangote refinery is going to be sold crude oil in Naira. Let us see how much the prices of crude oil are going to come down. Because it appears that Nigerians are oblivious of the fact that the biggest component in producing a liter of petrol is crude oil. And crude oil prices, when they go up or come down, they impact on the price of petroleum products, regardless of whether they are being paid for in Naira or in dollars. I think the impact of a fall or even a rise in the price of crude oil has a bigger impact on the price, the ultimate price that consumers will pay at the pump than the currency of settlement.
Agule, given the recent increase in reciprocal tariff by the Trump administration, how do you think this economic policy would impact on the Nigerian economy as per the cost of fuel, in view of the Naira for crude, a policy? Do you think it is going to, the Naira for crude policy would actually cushion the effect of the reciprocal tariff hike, or it won't have any effect at all? What are your thoughts on that?
Where I'm sitting here now, I cannot see any impact on the prices of petroleum products sold in Nigeria because of the tariffs or the trade war that American President Donald Trump has ignited. Because a tariff will make the product more expensive in America, not in Nigeria. So a tariff means if we in Nigeria want to supply something to the American market, maybe if you want to send yams or rice or anything to the American market, when it gets to the American market, they will add 14% on top of the landing cost and sell it to the American public. So the impact it could possibly have on us is that if the price of those products becomes too expensive and Americans don't want to buy it again, then it's going to impact on us because we will not be able to have the market to supply those products. Now we ask the question, what is Nigeria exporting to the United States? The biggest thing that Nigeria is exporting to the United States is crude oil. Crude oil is our biggest export to the United States. So first and foremost, the Trump administration says crude oil is not included in the basket of goods and services that the tariffs will apply on. And then secondly, even if the tariffs applied on crude oil and our crude oil landed in American market much more expensive than they are now, and American consumers or refineries no longer wanted to buy our crude oil. It's also to our advantage because we have a Dangote refinery who is looking for crude oil up and down to buy, and he can't find it. So if Nigeria can no longer have market access abroad to sell our crude oil, then we just sell the crude oil to Dangote refinery, who will now be very happy and will be refining petroleum products. So in summary, I don't see anything negative impacting on us uh, from the tariffs that Donald Trump has levied on Nigeria, the 14% tariffs that he has levied on us. Neither do I see any impact on the ultimate prices of petroleum products that we are paying at the pump, because the tariffs affect only goods going out of Nigeria. It doesn't affect goods that are being produced in Nigeria. Dangote refinery is refining for us here in Nigeria, supplying to us here in Nigeria, and the tariffs have no impact on that process whatsoever.
Mr. Agule, you did submit that we didn't see a commensurate reduction in fuel price, since the implementation of the first phase of the Naira for crude deal. So my question to you is, what sort of mechanisms do you feel should be in place to effectively implement this deal and see the, commensurate reduction in fuel price that we are all clamoring for? What are some of those things that should be in place to ensure that we get the reduction that we crave for, in your own view?
Well, so two things. What needs to be in place for the crude for Naira deal to continue? That's for the federal government to take a stand. And they have already taken a stand that the crude for Naira deal should continue. After the first phase, it should obviously go into the second phase. So it's the federal government that owns the crude oil, and they decide on how they want to treat that crude oil, whether they want to sell it to a local refiner like Dangote refinery, or they want to sell it abroad. And if they want to sell it to a local refinery, whether they want to accept dollars as the medium of exchange or they want to accept Naira, is for the government to decide. And I think they have decided. Now, what mechanisms are we going to put in place to make Nigerians see lower prices at the pumps? Because I was driving through Abuja yesterday and I noticed that prices were like 950 Naira a liter. And by the time I got a bit towards Kashi area of Abuja, I saw prices like 1,160, 1,190. To me, this is so high, very high. It then means that Nigeria's minimum wage cannot fill a tank of petrol. Nigeria minimum wage is so low. So the way to solve this is that it's either we have to increase the wages of workers, or we need to reduce the prices of goods and services in the market, including petroleum products. And the best way to reduce the prices is for the government agencies responsible for regulating the market. Specifically, in this case, the Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority. They should ensure that the fall in crude oil prices is being translated into a fall in the petroleum products prices that Nigerians are buying at the pump. With oil at $63 or $64, I can't see why Nigerians shouldn't be buying petrol at 700 Naira. Honestly, if we want to be fair. So it looks like the regulator is sleeping on duty. The regulator must wake up and begin to ask the operator, in this case, Dangote Refinery, to show the data as to why they were buying crude oil at $90 and now they are buying at $63, $64. Yet, Nigerians aren't seeing a dramatic or significant fall in the price of petroleum products at the pump. And of course, the other thing is that Dangote Refinery is a businessman. He's doing business with Nigerians, but we have our own refineries. And if we bring our refineries back on stream, we can do business with ourselves. So this is like a father who has yams. If he sells the yam to a restaurant before going to buy food, he's most likely going to buy expensive food. But if the father decides to cook that yam at home, pounds it at home, and gives the pounded yam to the children, it is likely going to be cheaper, right? And this is the issue with the refineries. If we have our own refineries, then the refineries will be ours. The crude oil will be ours. And if we put our own crude oil through our own refineries, we are not going to be looking at profit. We are going to be looking at selling that product to Nigerians at a price that they can afford, at a price that is going to cushion the effect of the economic hardship, at a price that is going to reduce inflation, at a price that is going to ensure that economic activities in Nigeria are going on very well. Because, this thing has multiplier effect. If businesses are facing lower prices, they will be happy, they will expand their business, and they will recruit more Nigerians into work. But if they are finding it hard to pay for petroleum products, because remember, we put a lot of petroleum products into generators to generate power. And if businesses can't meet up with the cost, they are closing shop. And as they are closing shop, Nigerians are being thrown out of work. So if the refineries are ours and crude is ours, we will be selling it at a price that gives us that multiplier effect. We will not only be focused on profit, but we will be looking at the fact that if the prices of petroleum products are cheaper, it then means that more Nigerians will get jobs, more Nigerian companies will do more business, they will pay more taxes to the government, and government will be able to deal with the fiscal deficit. The debt crisis that we are facing can be solved if more Nigerians are in work and our businesses are doing a lot of business and they are making profits. So this is the kind of economics that comes into it. Dangote is not going to understand those economics because for him, he just wants to make a profit. But if it's our refinery, we'll be looking at the bigger picture and not just profit making. So this will be my thoughts as to how we are going to reduce the cost of petroleum products in the Nigerian market.
To backtrack a little bit, right? I want us to clearly understand the stipulations of this contractual deal for the parties involved. So can you just briefly give us an overview? Because if it's a contract, then there are stipulations for either party. So I need you to just take us through these stipulations so that we will know whether the federal government is lacking probably in their own responsibility, or it's the Dangote refinery or local refineries that could be lagging, in this whole arrangement.
Well, I don't think any of the parties broke the agreement. Because what happened was that there was a Crude for Naira deal that was entered into for a period of time. And that period of time expired. And when the period of time expired, it then automatically meant that that contract, that deal, has also expired. But then the owner of the crude, the federal government of Nigeria, has decided that we should go into phase 2 of the contract. So I expect that by now, if not shortly, Dangote refinery will now start receiving crude oil and paying in Naira. So the deal is back on the table. However, if we step back and look at the historical situation, what really happened was that during the construction phase of the Dangote refinery, the NNPCL went and entered a deal with Dangote refinery. And it was a crude swap deal whereby the NNPCL took shareholding in Dangote refinery. And when you take a share, when you buy a share in a company, you are expected to pay for it. And NNPCL say, okay, instead of us paying you money for the shares that we have taken in your company, we are going to pay you with crude oil. So basically, you value the shares that the NNPCL took and then pay for those shares in crude oil. And Dangote refinery was happy with that, so they entered the deal. However, when Dangote refinery now went on stream and started producing, the NNPCL were not pushing to Dangote refinery the crude oil in repayment for the shares that they took in Dangote refinery. And that is why Aliko Dangote, the owner of Dangote refinery, came to the media to say that, oh, the NNPCL have not paid for the shares that they bought in Dangote refinery. So he is taking those shares back, and that deal is now underwater. That deal is not going on again. It was then from there that the federal government, then Dangote finally started saying, oh, started crying that I am being made to pay for crude oil in dollars, whereas I'm selling the products in Naira. And that is when the government now stepped in and said, okay, NNPCL sell crude to Dangote in dollars, but let him pay us in Naira. And that is what led us to where we are now. And for me, all of this, we still not see significant fall in price of crude oil. In fact, the impact of the exchange rate was supposed to be more than the impact on prices in terms of the crude for Naira, even though the impact on the exchange rate did not also happen. That's to tell you that the exchange rate crisis in Nigeria goes much more beyond what Dangote refinery was sourcing for dollars to go and buy crude oil for. There's a lot more demand that surpasses that of Dangote refinery, because if Dangote refinery's demand for dollars was as significant as we thought it was, immediately he stopped demanding dollars because he was buying crude in Naira. We expected to see a significant strengthening of the Naira, but we never saw that strengthening. Naira never made it to 1,400 throughout the period of that crude for Naira deal. So if the Nigerian government is interested in making the Naira stronger, they have to look to other ways. And for me, it's another conversation we can have another day, because who benefits from a strong Naira? The only people who benefit from a strong Naira are those who are importing stuff into Nigeria. Otherwise, a weak Naira is the one that will make our goods cheaper, and it will encourage export. And that's what we want. We want to export more. We don't want to be importing. We want to export more. And if we want to be exporting, then we shouldn't be bothering about a weak Naira, because that's actually what helps us. That's what makes us more competitive.
All right, I actually wanted you to speak more to the fact that there's a possibility that one of the parties probably defaulted in this Naira for crude deal, given the fact that a party defaulted in the first deal. However, we might have to glean over that. But my question to you now is, what is the role of the Central Bank of Nigeria in this new crude pricing model?
Yeah, so if I may touch back on the default by a party in the deal, if there was any default in that deal, it would have come from the NNPCL angle, specifically because the NNPCL doesn't have enough crude oil to give to Dangote refinery. That's just a fact. We just need to be very, very factual about that. At 1.3, 1.5, 1.8, depending on whose numbers you want to believe, Nigeria is producing so small a quantity of crude oil that it cannot possibly satisfy all of the needs and the commitments that we have put in place. United States got about 50 billion barrels of crude oil reserves, and Nigeria is, in fact, the NUPRC just announced that we have 37 billion barrels of crude oil reserve. The United States is extracting crude oil at more than 10 million barrels a day. Sometimes they get to 13, sometimes they get to 15 million. And Nigeria is doing less than 2 million. So we are not producing enough crude oil at all. We are producing so small an amount of crude oil that NNPCL cannot possibly meet up with any obligation to Dangote refinery. So that's just that angle. Now, coming to the Central Bank of Nigeria's role in this, well, in the crude for Naira deal, I don't see any role for the central bank, because this is an agreement between two corporate entities, the NNPCL and Dangote refinery. And the NNPCL has the crude, they give it to Dangote refinery, and Dangote refinery pay them in Naira. These are transactions that are happening with the commercial banks, except, of course, the fact that the NNPCL is a government entity. They may have an account at the central bank, but I would think that they're actually taking the money that Dangote refinery is paying them in the commercial banking system. Or even if they were banking it at the central bank, it will just be that the central bank is acting in its role as banker to the government or to a government agency. Is not in any, there's no role in terms of a direct involvement of the central bank in this. Because what is happening between Dangote refinery and NNPCL It's the same thing that will happen to me if I enter a shop now, I want to buy a TV set. So if I enter a shop, I want to buy a TV set. Already the importer of the TV set, he imported the TV set paying dollars abroad, but he converted it and he's selling the TV to me in Naira. And I just bring out my phone, transfer money from my account to his account, and I carry the TV home. So that's the kind of thing that's happening. Of course, the central bank is the regulator of the banking system in Nigeria. So in an indirect way, it is involved because it's the central bank that ensures that that kind of transaction stays through. But I don't see any direct involvement.
uh, you've actually spoken to what I talked about, I spoke about earlier when I said there's a particular amount of crude according to the deal that was stipulated to be supplied to the Dangote refinery, which was not met. Now, if this challenge still persists, how do you see the effective implementation of the deal during the second phase?
Yeah, so if the challenge of insufficient crude oil supplied to Dangote refinery persists, and of course it will persist, it's not going to be solved easily. Yeah, the only way to solve it is to increase the output of crude oil production in Nigeria. And that's going to take a bit of time, perhaps a few months or running into years. My advice to President Tinubu always, when I have an opportunity, just like now, is to tell him that he should call all the stakeholders in the oil industry to a summit in his office. You see, President Tinubu needs to be investing time in the critical sectors of the economy. So you need to invest time in the power sector, in the rail sector, in the steel sector, in the domestic gas sector. The same way I encourage him to invest time in the oil sector. So if he calls these people to his office, I say he should ask them one question to say that Nigeria produced 2.5 million barrels of crude oil before. That means the infrastructure to produce crude oil at that volume exists in Nigeria, is on the ground. You should ask the operators, what must I do as your president to take us back to that 2.5 million barrels in the first place before we now start thinking about increasing the production to 3 million barrels, 4 million barrels, 5 million barrels, or even to 7 million barrels per day. And it is such a factual meeting that the president will hold with the oil operators that will expose him to the issues that are militating against Nigeria attaining our 2.5 million barrels production that we had attained previously. And then he, as president, will use all the powers conferred on his office to tackle those issues, debottleneck, clear them up, so that Nigeria production can rise to 2.5 million barrels that will have the infrastructure to produce, right, before we now start to increase. So that is the only solution that can now make the NNPCA have enough crude oil to supply to Dangote refinery, not just NNPCL, the other local crude oil producers will have enough crude oil to supply to Dangote refinery. Up until something like that happens, I can't see where the NNPCL is going to manufacture enough crude oil to give to Dangote refinery. So this second phase of the deal is most likely going to continue in line with the first, which is NNPCL will be supplying crude oil to Dangote refinery and obtaining payment in cash. The NNPCL will be unable to meet up with the quantities of crude oil as specified in the agreement.
Agule, you did mention that the Naira for crude deal was a response, by the federal government to a default in the agreement between the Dangote refinery and NNPCL. Could there be other motivations, to this deal? Because there's a reason. It's really important that we establish the reasons, why some things are done, even as individuals, as governments, as organizations. So could there be other motivations behind the Naira for crude deal, maybe to strengthen, economic motivations to strengthen our Naira, maybe? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I've already made a mention, I touched on that. I say that unlike what a lot of Nigerians think, that the Naira for crude, or sorry, the crude for Naira will reduce the cost of petroleum products. I don't view it that way. My view is that because Dangote refinery is still paying the same cost, whether it is in naira or in dollar, it's not going to have much impact on the price of petroleum products. Rather, the bigger impact is on the exchange rate. It was expected to have a bigger impact on the exchange rate because just imagine that Dangote refinery, let's say NNPCL was supplying um, crude oil to Dangote refinery. Let's say NNPCL supplies 300,000 dollars. If NNPCL supply $300,000 and crude oil is at $60. So if you multiply 60 times 300, you are going to get you multiply, you're going to get like $18 million per day. $18 million per day is what Dangote refinery needs to buy crude oil from NNPCL. And if that $18 million was being paid for in Naira, it then meant that Dangote refinery didn't go to the foreign exchange market to go and source $18 million. So we were expected to have cheaper products. We expected to have cheaper products. I know we're not expected to have cheaper products. We're expected to see the impact on the foreign exchange. The demand for Naira significantly dropped. And so we're expecting to see a positive impact in terms of the strength of the Naira. But we never saw it. We actually never saw it. Like throughout the tenure of that deal, the Naira never strengthened to 1,400. It remained 1,500, touching 1,600, coming to 1,500. So for me, it also shows that the demand for Naira in Nigeria far more outweighs whatever impact Dangote refinery has in the market, in the foreign exchange market. So those are my views on that.
All right, finally, Mr. Agule, before we let you go, we have this one question, right? You did mention that your part of your advice to the federal government will be to increase production of crude so as to meet their quota to the refineries, Dangote refineries. However, I'm thinking in my mind, and you're an economist, so you let me know if that is a correct way of thinking. I'm thinking if an increase in production isn't possible, would it work to reduce or cut down exportation of crude and channel it to our local refineries so that they can meet, the quota for the deal? Is it something that is doable to reduce export of crude and channel it to our local refineries so that the deal, can be upheld? What do you think?
So first and foremost, I am not an economist. I didn't read economics. I read accounting. I'm a chartered accountant, but I analyze economic matters. So if you call me an economic analyst, I will say yes, but I'm not an economist. Then secondly, you mentioned that can we reduce the export of crude oil so that we can have enough crude oil feedstock to give to Dangote refinery? And my answer is that if that was possible, then it's a better option for us to take. But you see, the thing with crude oil is that crude oil is not like tomato, where you harvest and take to the market and sell. Crude oil transactions or contracts are entered into for the long term. So you will see that crude oil producers in Nigeria, they have already entered long-term agreements with crude oil off-takers or even financial institutions to take their crude oil for 5, 10, 15, 20 years ahead. If you now say, oh, go and break those deals, don't meet up with the obligations of those deals again, and turn your crude oil over to Dangote refinery, there will be a lot of lawsuits that these Nigerian operators are going to face globally, where people will take them to court to try and enforce the agreements that were signed. I worked in the oil industry in Nigeria for a long time. I worked for 2 IOCs in Nigeria. So I can tell you that I know for a fact that a lot of the local producers in Nigeria, they have already committed their crude oil to banks and other financial institutions. So the deal was that the financial institutions will fund the operations of the oil field. And when the crude oil is produced, part of it is used to service the debt. You get what I'm saying? So now, the financial institution funded an oil field in Nigeria. When crude oil was produced, we now say, no, don't go and service your debt with that financial institution that gave you money to operate the field. Go and give that crude oil to Dangote refinery. You know, that's going to be a problem, right? It will be a real problem. So some of these commitments are done with refiners abroad and things like that. So for me, I expect Dangote refinery to look further afield and find contracts that he will sign for the long term to guarantee adequate crude oil feedstock for his refinery. If you are operating a 650,000 barrels refinery, that's a lot of crude oil that you need every day. 650,000 barrels per day is a lot of crude oil. So if you look at an economy like the United States is producing more than 10 million barrels of crude oil. Yet it is still importing crude oil from other places, including Nigeria. Yet the same United States is exporting crude oil. You know, so this is how crude oil business runs. It doesn't mean that because you're a refinery based in Nigeria, you must get your crude oil from Nigerian oil wells. It doesn't happen like that. That is not the way it happens globally. You know, the way it happens globally is that crude oil moves in accordance with who owns it and where they want to take it. They want to take it to. So the United States is importing more than 5 million barrels of crude oil per day. They are also exporting crude oil and they are producing crude oil. So for me, Dangote refinery should just get off his desk and go around the world and look for where he can get crude oil to buy to satisfy the demands of his 650,000 barrels refinery.
All right, global economic analyst, Mr. Nick Agule, thank you so much for your time and your insights in this discussion.
Thank you very much, and happy Sunday to our viewers.
All right, New Day continues right after this time out. To stay with us.
Signature TV, news in your pocket.